Print, email, Facebook, Twitter. More. Victorian Parliament votes on law to negotiate Australia's first Aboriginal treaty 30 years since former Prime Minister Bob Hawke promised a treaty. Aboriginal leaders have urged the federal government to reignite the idea. The lower house of Victoria's Parliament voted in favour of negotiating Australia's first Aboriginal treaty on Thursday, after the state's Labor government won crucial support from the Greens. The treaty bill is opposed by the Victorian opposition, which favours a national approach. The bill will now proceed to the upper house, where Labour will need the support of the Greens and a crossbencher. While the three lower house Greens MPs voted for the bill on Thursday, Greens MP Lydia Thorpe, Victoria's only Indigenous parliamentarian, wants the word sovereignty included in the legislation to acknowledge that Aboriginal people still own the land of Victoria. "It is disappointing we're still fighting for this government to acknowledge Aboriginal sovereignty. A treaty is between two sovereigns," she said. The legislation will facilitate the establishment of an Elders' Council, and a statewide meeting involving traditional owner groups, clans and organisations will be held to progress negotiations on a treaty. Victoria's Aboriginal Affairs Minister Natalie Hutchins said her state, and others, were going it alone because Canberra had turned its back on the issue. "We know the federal government are not doing anything in this space," she said. "Other states are in the very preliminary stages of these sort of talks as well, and I know this will encourage them, because we are leading a new path on how to do this." Janine Coombs, a What Job Luke woman and chair of the Federation of Victorian Traditional Owner Corporations, said a treaty would be for future generations. "Elders never thought they would see this happen." Treaty dominates discussion at the Brunga Festival near Katherine in the Northern Territory this weekend. Treaty will dominate discussions at one of Australia's most important cultural festivals. The Northern Territory's Aboriginal Land Councils have asked the Chief Minister to sign a Memorandum of Understanding on a treaty. Kimberley leader Peter Yu, Chief Executive of Nyambaburu Yuru, said treaties could help establish a dignified relationship in relation to our coexistence in this country. Australia is the only Commonwealth nation that has not negotiated a treaty with its Indigenous population. Mr. Yu said an agreement with the Commonwealth was still the key priority for First Nations people. "It is to happen at a national level," he said. "It's the political leadership is missing in this country for many, many years. It is what continues to feed and bring the flies to the festering sores we grapple with on a daily basis." This month, a joint parliamentary committee will begin a fresh round of consultations with Indigenous communities over potential changes to the Constitution. Hundreds of delegates at Uluru last May called for a permanent Indigenous advisory body to be enshrined in the Constitution. The summit, which followed 6 months of consultations, also recommended a commission be established to oversee new treaties with First Nations groups. Kimberley Land Council Chair Anthony Watson said the federal government's rejection of the Uluru Statement had been a setback and a disappointment. "We put a lot of effort into Uluru and the consultations. A turning point. Federal government has said there could be other ideas for change, either to be taken to a referendum or to be legislated, that may be recommended by the cross-party committee." Hundreds of Indigenous people have been in Broome this week to discuss their rights over land and sea at the National Native Title Conference. Craig Ritchie, Chief Executive of the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies, said Indigenous nations were at a turning point. "All turning points are a bit turbulent. Australia continues to come to grips with how it relates to its Indigenous peoples. I think people feel the disappointment. It's undeniable. Progress on Indigenous recognition and land rights had been too slow, but there were many signs for hope," Mr. Ritchie said. "The good thing about people coming together here is they're wanting to learn from one another because there are parts of the country, such as the Kimberley, where Indigenous people are really owning their own space," Mr. Ritchie said. Print, email, Facebook, Twitter.